Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being a part of this talk, this series of events. I'm really honored and pleased to be here as part of this series that Malle's put together. And I do want to start out, before I even get into the topic of the talk, to point out that this is a strike day. It's the first of a series of strike days that have just been announced by not just university unions, but many across the UK. And even though it is a strike day, obviously this lecture is going ahead because it's a public event. But I do want to immediately acknowledge the strikes that are happening and express my solidarity for those that are striking. I'm not personally striking because I'm in a research-only temporary contract, which doesn't really uh, make much space for the possibility of strike. But anyway, let's acknowledge that before we get started with the main theme, which is the semiotics of AI and its connection, as I'm hoping to draw out and show, with technological colonialism, what has been called by several authors the Westernizing dream of artificial intelligence. So to outline, I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about the notion of semiotics, three different meanings or definitions of what semiotics is, and from there kind of jump fairly headfirst into some philosophical territory. I am a philosopher by training, unfortunately, but I have made efforts to at least design the PowerPoint as far away as I can from white background and black text, which tends to be the pattern in philosophy conferences and stuff. But anyway, we're going to get into some philosophical territory around the invention or construction of the humanities as a set of disciplines associated with the Enlightenment in Europe over the 18th and 19th centuries. And I want to draw out, entangle this evolution of the humanities as academic disciplines with the perpetuation and reinforcement of colonial logics of oppression, violence, racism, etc., which I've called colonial philosophies of technology, the kinds of imaginaries and narratives that get used to maintain colonial practices. I want to say that from the beginning that these are closely connected, embroiled with the creation of artificial intelligence in every respect. From there, I'm going to talk a bit about securitization and security, which is more closely related to my work on the Trustworthy Autonomous Systems project that I'll talk about hopefully at the end. And use this notion of security as a way to approach some of the most complex and densest elements of how AI is produced and maintained as systems, as technologies, as concrete things, but also as a way of thinking, as a logic. And that then brings us into the main kind of influence of this talk, which is a project by Kate Crawford and Vladimir Euler called Anatomy of AI. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. And then, by way of looking for some light, some hope, maybe some optimism in all of this, talk a bit at the end about how AI is being used and presumably will be used further to disrupt some of these dominant colonial logics of AI, and conclude with some indigenous protocols for AI that both Malle and I have worked with in the past, to try and find some route, some way to get out of this very tangled knot of AI and colonialism. But before I get into all of that, I want to start out just by provoking you a little bit, getting some of your thoughts, your views on this, with this image, which is an image of the footballer Lionel Messi that was produced shortly before Argentina's victory in the World Cup last year. by this program, this company Lens AI. I'm sure many of you have come across them. And I want to just start by asking you who or what you think should be credited for the production of this image. That's the opening question. So please put your thoughts in the Q&A, share now or throughout the lecture anything you have, anything that you're thinking about in relation to who owns, let's say, or whose image this is. Okay, so you can feel free to drop any thoughts in the chat while we go on. But where I want to start is properly start is with this notion of semiotics. So what semiotics even is, and there's three different meanings that I'm working with. At its most basic, it's kind of initial form, if you like. Semiotics is just the study of signs and symbols. So it's a branch of linguistics, particularly computational linguistics, and semiotics as a discipline kind of emerged around the kind of mid-19th century as a way of understanding, of articulating how it is, basically, that human beings understand language. So that's one meaning of semiotics. AI semiotics is, let's say, another register of this, referring to the algorithms, the programming of algorithms that are used to process, quote, natural language. So this is closely tied with things like machine learning and is taken as a technique, as you can see by this. This is actually a promo for a company called Semiotic AI that's doing precisely this, developing algorithms to process and understand spoken languages. But I want to extend this a little bit further and say that semiotics of AI, which is what I'm trying to do here, hopefully, is not just the study of symbols, but of cultural imaginaries, of political effects, and material practices around AI and AI ethics production, including the way that it's made, its use, how it's dismantled, and how it's disposed of. And as an approach, the methods, if you like, that I'm using are diffractive, which is a word kind of popularized by Karen Barad over the last 20 years, in the sense that they kind of diffract, bounce off of each other various different domains or scales of AI. They're non-linear in the sense that I'm not trying to trace a path from some proto form of AI, some kind of rustic AI, to what we have now. And they're folded in the sense that all of these various dimensions that we're going to get into of how AI is made connect with each other in interesting ways. It's not just a line, going back to Male's talk a couple of weeks ago. We're not here just talking about a chain of value. We're talking about something that diffracts, that encounters, that bounces off each other. A very complex and tangled process. So that's what I really want to stress from the beginning. What do we even mean by imaginaries? So the main questions that I'm trying to pose, at least, if not address in this talk, is how AI systems are imagined and who or what imagines them. So this is one example of when you ask the image AI generated, the image generator that's been made by bored humans. If you ask it to produce images about a human system of ethics, this is what it gives you. So the real preoccupation in all of this is really this question of who gets the chance, who has the power to decide how AI is imagined. Okay, so that's the problem we're starting with, and immediately I want to tie this problem of AI to another problem which the humanities in Europe was trying to answer, which is this question of what it means to be human. What is a human being? And there are various answers offered to this throughout the centuries that humanities as a set of disciplines has been going on. One philosopher who I'm personally interested in is Friedrich Schelling, who says that even the idea of a human subject, so a human being, a human individual, as an idea, he calls this a convenient fiction which is used to solve philosophical problems. So this thing that we're trying to debate, which seems so high stakes, what does it mean to be human? It's just a fiction that we created to write books. Another answer that's been offered to this comes from Michel Foucault here in puppet form, who says that the human subject is both a subject and an object of power. And this is one approach to all the themes of this talk that I want to highlight, that what is produced through AI is both the subject of power in the sense that it's us humans that are creating it, and it's the object of power in the sense that it's a tool used to perpetuate, manifest ways of thinking. And I'm going to say particularly colonial ways of thinking. Another perspective that I want to introduce straight away is from the Indigenous Protocols for AI. This quote comes from their position paper from 2018. And this offers another way of thinking about our relationship as human beings, not just to technology, but to the natural world, which makes technology possible. So the key thing here is the responsibility in the relationship. Everything that comes with the Kanaka, the human, their faults, cellular structure, that gets folded in to the mineral. And this idea of folding in to the mineral is what I want to stay with during this talk. There are various registers, if you like, of being in the world that get collapsed, that get thrown together when we talk about artificial intelligence, and they travel across material and supposedly immaterial domains. So there is a real way in which systems of thought and minerals encounter in very significant ways. So there's many answers, or at least proposed answers to this question of what is human, but there's never really been a consensus. We can't really agree as a species on what it means to be a human. Nevertheless, the humanities, in Europe at least, is this set of disciplines which follow certain assumptions. And I want to show how these assumptions carry through into the way in which artificial intelligence is imagined and popularized today. So humanities, as this set of European Enlightenment associated disciplines, assume that the human being is basically the center of the universe, even if only intellectually. And this entails certain things. So humanities privilege logocentrism, logos meaning knowledge, so knowledge being the main mode of expression for our encounters with the world. Rationalism, the assumption that everything around us follows reasonable, rational laws. And so a scientific universalism, which assumes that the natural sciences are the best, if not the only way in which human beings can tell the truth about nature or the world. So the very broad shared assumption is that human beings produce science and science produces truth, singular, about nature, the planet, the cosmos, etc. And this entails an even larger assumption, which is that everything around us, the planet, natural resources, etc., exist only to serve human purposes. So here in this picture of Benjamin Franklin, the lightning exists only in order for him to discover electricity. That's the whole point of its existence. Now, immediately, I want to flag up that this tradition of the humanities is intimately connected with colonial violence, various forms of racism, and extractionism, as the assumption that if nature is just there for us, we can use it however we want. And these ties still exist in many different ways in disciplines around AI and AI ethics, as we're talking. So there's this intimate connection between thinking the planet is for us and then asking who us is. And of course, usually it's white males. And what nature is for, which is to service white males' needs. And included in that nature, that kind of neutral space that we can use to extract, are everyone and everything that is not a white male. So this association between a kind of scientific universalism, an assumption of scientific truth as the ultimate form of knowledge, and how humanities exists today in higher education institutions in many different places. A couple of examples that I want to share, which kind of point this out, come firstly from this institute at the University of Oxford called the Future of Humanity Institute. And I have to give credit to Rosa Braidotti here because her talk drew my attention to this, so credit to her. And this institute receives some of the largest subsidiaries and funding packages from the UK government of any academic programme in the UK, and is globally competitive as well. And this quote from their website, I think, gives some idea of the ambitions, if you like, of what the humanities can accomplish. So our focus in this area, they say, is the impact of future technology capabilities and impacts, including the possibility and impact of artificial general intelligence or super intelligence, existential risk assessment, anthropics, population ethics, human enhancement ethics, game theory, etc., etc. So these are the real big ticket items. Human enhancement and human enhancement ethics is one that I want to circle back to later on. But you can see here the scope of something called the Future of Humanity Institute and the kinds of challenges that it's grappling with or hoping to grapple with. Similarly, in University of Cambridge, there's this Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, which has a similar kind of mission to study extreme risks associated with emerging and future technological advances. So the idea of technological advances, specifically artificial intelligence, as one of the main spaces that we're going to have to navigate as human beings is everywhere. It's saturated through academic and non-academic forms of media. And the imagery that's used to present it very often follows a similar pattern. So brains often appear. And another thing that appears is this assumption, which is rooted in these kind of humanities disciplines, that it's ultimately up to human beings to, and within human beings' power, to alter and harness the planet in ways that it's really never been messed with before. This ethics of artificial intelligence, as it's called, is also something that's used to justify or sometimes cover up the ongoing colonial practices and forms of oppression that are required in this current way of being to make AI possible. So the way that technologies are imagined, the way they're talked about, the way that they're thought about is deeply entangled with how people, worlds, and matters are imagined also. And this includes ethics. And one of the realities, one of the worlds that I want to spread some light on can be seen in images like this. So this is a lithium salt mine in Chile, which has been almost entirely extracted, meaning all the valuable minerals from this part of land have been taken. And the result, as you can see, is a fairly barren landscape. accompanied by some pools that are used to essentially evaporate underground water aquifers to expose the lithium. These are the kinds of realities that extractionist, westernizing, colonialist imaginaries produce. And one that I think is particularly interesting given current events is this, which is actually an artist's rendering of the proposed final product that is the gigafactory of Tesla in Nevada. And this is so far just an artist's impression. The actual thing doesn't look like this. But the mission statement, when you go onto Tesla's website, accompanying this image, is to join us as we accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Okay, the world's transition to sustainable energy. The reality is, this is the actual gigafactory as it exists, I think, as of 2019. And this factory is estimated to use 50% of the world's annual consumption of lithium per year. So half of all the lithium consumption on Earth is because of this one factory. So already the dissonance between these two imaginaries, these two images, is quite clear, and already the costs are also becoming clear. Associated very heavily with these kinds of images are ones like this. This is a cobalt mine in the Congo. Images like this of a cobalt miner in a nearby region, almost certainly under what we could call legal working age. Child labour is a common feature of the way in which cobalt and lithium are extracted. Cobalt and lithium being the main components of things like rechargeable batteries that go in Tesla cars, the chips that go in smartphones, as well as the technologies that are used in Amazon, both in what it sells and in how it produces it. So this is an Amazon smart warehouse in Yorkshire that was the subject of some debate in the area because the prospected jobs that this factory was supposed to produce were, it turns out, grossly overestimated, and so there was a lot of opposition to this factory. But already you can see that the amount of material and ecological investment in producing and sustaining artificial intelligence is enormous, and it's planetary in scope. And of course, the next stage of this is images like this, e-waste disposal units, where the vast majority, way over 80% of all components of not just autonomous or intelligent technologies, but any kind of digital technology, are disposed of in ways that essentially mean that they'll lie there like this forever. So these are some of the immediate material associations between how AI is imagined and how it's pitched to us as, let's say, its potential consumers, and the reality of its production. That's the first entanglement that I want to draw out. The second one that I want to draw out has to do, as I said before, with the notion of security, and particularly securitization. So this is where it's going to get somewhat philosophical again. But the point here is that the concept of security as a way of talking about intelligent technologies, AI being one of them, has very particular cultural associations and aesthetic associations. The fact that, for example, every image that you can find that's to do with security and any kind of technology is always blue, always blue. Why blue? Supposedly it's the most calming of the colors, but that's in itself a kind of semiotic character that I want to draw attention to. These notions of security and securitization that I'm going to talk about now have, again, intellectual, or let's say epistemological associations. The way that, for example, autonomous vehicles are pitched to us in the media and in academic work have close associations with notions of utopia, positivism, progress, the idea that we are, as a species, again, getting just increasingly better at producing things that do better for us. So everything can only get better. We're on an upward trajectory to some kind of utopia where technologies are just perfectly integrated with human life. I think even a cursory glance at anything that's going on at the moment is enough to, starkly challenge this optimism. But this is the way that these technologies are imagined and presented, as some kind of utopian interface or utopian space where human beings are just, kind of contently in service with their technological counterparts. So I want to draw out some of the associations between these kinds of images of, in this case, autonomous vehicle security, with what Foucault says about security and how it's linked to maintaining these kind of dominant modes of power that we started out with. So Foucault talks about security not as a feature, but as a process, essentially. He calls it the apparatus, or dispositif in French, that maintains things within, quote, socially and economically acceptable limits. In other words, the purpose of security is to make sure capitalism keeps functioning just fine. He goes on in this series of lectures from 78 to talk about security as a series of checks or spectrums of possibility, predictive controls around what he calls an average that will be considered as optimal for given social functioning. This kind of language, optimal functioning, spectrums of possibility, predictive controls, is precisely the language that's used in computer science domains to describe what happens when AI acts, makes decisions, makes effects in the world. So the link here between forms of power, and I'm going to keep insisting colonial forms of power, and the very matter, the very kind of logic that makes these technologies work, they are also deeply entangled with each other. And more than just being a technique of power, this process of securitization, as Foucault calls it, is linked again to this very question of what it is that makes us human, what he calls subjectification. Subjectification, for Foucault, is the set of mechanisms through which the basic biological features of the human species become the object of a political strategy, of a general strategy of power. So all of these spaces that we've already opened into, the space of human beings, the space of the natural world and natural resources, the space of AI and AI technologies, are all deeply connected to this general strategy of power. So what is this general strategy of power? What is this kind of conspiracy, it almost seems like, that's governing all of this? The point that I want to try and make here is that it's not so much a conspiracy. It's not something that's just been concocted in the minds of some evil white men capitalists. Rather, it's a force that operates across different domains and different registers of existence. The domain of political theory, the domain of material extractionist production, the domain of manufacturing. All of these things work with each other and through each other to maintain this so-called Westernizing dream of AI. And one of the things that spat out on the other end of this process is the inverse of all of this utopian talk that we get presented. It's the figure of the villain, the figure of the other that's created. And these kinds of words, extremist, terrorist, hacker, deviant, threat, these kinds of words that are used to describe this imagined subject that's going to come and attack, intervene in these utopian technologies, as seen by images like this. So the larger point here in all of this is that the idea of providing a service, or the idea of creating a system, such as an AI system, comes along with a whole set of assumptions, of norms, of ways of thinking that are themselves embedded in very deep, long assumptions, all of the assumptions that we've been talking about so far. So when we think about something like, for example, an autonomous vehicle service, the interface, the way in which a person interacts with an autonomous vehicle, it gives us enough already to consider what a service even is. What is this imaginary, this scenario that we're presented over and over again of this amazed spectator to an autonomous car supposedly making decisions for itself? What is this service? In what does it consist? Who is it for? What is it for? And importantly, I want to emphasize the question of who decides what it is, who has the power to erase, and who is erased by that process. So this is another example. And this, if you Google autonomous vehicle security, you get all these kinds of images. They're always the same. They always have that same hue, that same strange graphic on top. And they're always about some kind of everyday object like a car or a tractor interacting in this new space, this new zone that's created by artificial intelligence technologies. A zone which ends up, when you get down to the kind of fine grain of it, looking like this. This is an image that's taken from a computer program that was tasked with visualizing essentially how the sensors on autonomous vehicles see other vehicles and other objects. This is the kind of imaginary that we're dealing with. And in the time that we've got left, I want to draw out a little bit further the inheritances, the baggage, if you like, that this kind of image comes with. And I'm going to get into that by returning to Kate Crawford and talking about the myths that are associated with AI. Crawford says it quite clearly. AI is neither artificial nor intelligent. So if AI is neither of its two defining words, then what is it? What is it that we're talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence? So I'm going to pause there for a moment just to I know that was quite a lot of information just thrown to the screen. But the point of all of this is really to draw attention to one of Crawford's projects, which I feel as though I'm pursuing as well in my current research, which is to draw out all of these associations, again, on a global scale, between modes of production, cultural imaginaries, and labor that are required for AI to exist. And one way in which Crawford and Vlad and Yola try and do this is through their Anatomy of an AI System project. And I want to just go through a few frames from this map. It's an extremely large map that tries to depict what happens every time someone says hello to an Amazon Echo. So in each instance of an interaction between a user and an Amazon Echo, this is everything that happens on a planetary scale. Some of the parts of this map, we don't have time to cover it all, but some of the parts that I think are relevant for what I'm arguing here have to do with what they call fractal chains of production and exploitation. The idea that the investments, the sheer amount of matter and labor required to produce artificial intelligence technologies is so vast that every time you try to investigate even one aspect of it, the dimensions of exploitation amplify almost infinitesimally. Every time you pursue one avenue, even something like the mines that are used to get the cobalt, the lithium, other precious metals out of the earth and into an Amazon Alexa, Amazon Echo, you start to uncover this whole ecosystem that is sustained by colonialism, exploitation, oppression, racism, the humanities as imagined by Ben Franklin, let's say, without being too polemic. The quantification of nature, every time you prod this map in any direction, you end up with a vast amount of information, of connections, of entanglements between how human beings imagine what nature is, what AI is, what intelligence is, and how they actually make things happen, the actions, the affects of these imaginaries. And one of the effects of these imaginaries that we're seeing more and more at the moment is in images like this, facial recognition. And I think the resonances between this image and the one I showed earlier, trying to measure human skulls of different races, it kind of says it all, really. Facial recognition is just one of the strands, one of the threads that you can pull at and find all kinds of problematic practices, assumptions, biases, and again, oppressions, exploitations, erasures. But I want to kind of ground all of this again by saying that where we always end up fundamentally through all of this is back here in the mind. All of this is only possible because of this huge amount of extraction of the Earth's natural resources. So the scope of AI and the scope of AI ethics is this big. It goes really down to the Earth as a system, as a thing, as a period of time that's happened, the geological process, as they call it. This is how deep AI goes. So all of this stuff to do with the imaginaries, but also the practices of artificial intelligence production, they all connect to something that Arturo Escobar articulates as a one world world. So this very closely ties with the humanities that I was showing earlier, that the world is basically singular, meaning Western or Westernized. It's manipulable. We can do things with it, meaning we can use it to sustain capitalism. It's calculable. We know how it works and what it does. It's rational. It follows laws. And the world is neutral, meaning it doesn't have any quality of its own, meaning colonial, in the sense that a piece of land, including the people living there, is seen as simply blank space to be used, to be manipulated. This is the basis of colonialism. So with all of that in mind, and I know it can be a little bit overwhelming. I was overwhelmed by Monica's talk last week as well, so I think that's a common theme. But all of this presents an opportunity, I want to say, for other ways of thinking and other ways of doing artificial intelligence. And in fact, one of those opportunities comes precisely from these very problematic humanities that we keep coming back to, the idea of human enhancement. Human enhancement just meaning, as the Stanford Encyclopedia says, biomedical interventions used to improve human form or functioning beyond what's necessary to restore or sustained health, beyond what is necessary. So human enhancement is one of the spaces, one of the domains, the registers that AI creates. And one way in which this human enhancement idea has been employed is in the service of art. So artists like Lance King, pictured here, use so-called smart technologies like this microchip you see pictured as part of their artworks, as part of their production. Technology here is a tool, but it's also a form of artistic practice. My body is my work. That's the idea. But this same opportunity, this same possibility, creates other possibilities. Human enhancement as precisely this process of securitization, of surveillance. So how is artificial intelligence folded into effects of power? That's where we see one fold come back together. The same technology that makes art possible makes surveillance possible, and both are equally tied to the technology itself. Another way in which this idea of human enhancement can act is to disrupt. If any of you've seen Kendrick Lamar's video from last year, you'll know what I mean in terms of using a technology to question how that technology even works. So, we need to think about how artificial intelligence speaks back to us or through us, as well as how we use it. One example that I want to draw attention to in this kind of space, this disruptive space, is from an artist called Zach Blass, who a few years ago produced a series of masks that were designed to evade facial recognition technology, that then became the subject of an art exhibition. And the masks were produced not just to avoid facial recognition software, but to make larger points about the way in which facial recognition software is produced and trained, namely to detect only or mostly white faces, to immediately flag any face that doesn't fit the criteria, meaning any face that's not white. And in Zach Blass's case, these kinds of masks were used to talk about how the definition of homosexual man, when used in training facial recognition software, is tied to all kinds of extremely homophobic and archaic ways of thinking, logics to do with homosexuality, particularly homosexuality meaning deviance. This is another example which was used to point out the way in which facial recognition software, when it is trained to detect black faces, is done in such a kind of piecemeal mishmash way that the idea of what a black human face even means is distorted beyond all recognition. So these kinds of things, as well as this example of a pair of facial recognition evading sunglasses, are some examples of how the technology we're talking about here, AI, is being used to challenge the very basis, the very foundation of its production. And all of this, in turn, is tied to something that's loosely called the new humanities. So rather than this humanities I've been discussing, which is only one strand again, associated with colonialism, with scientific universalism, all of this, there's this other way of doing humanities, pioneered by people like Donna Haraway, who I think says it very clearly: I'd rather be a cyborg than a goddess. How do we think and do AI differently is the question of new humanities. And its associated strands, again, more-than-humanism is one, which is again tied to the Indigenous Protocols. So instead of thinking about what AI can do for us, or what we need to make it work, or what purpose it serves, or whose power it plays into, let's think about AI in a reciprocal relationship, not as mere tools, or worse, as slaves to their creators. This requires that we think about us, humans, as neither the height nor the center of creation. So rather than this human-centered universe where we are the only important thing, and by we, again, there's a heavy qualification, we white European males for the most part, we think about it differently. We think about a world that's not neutral nature and scientific rational humans, but a world where everything is animate and has spirit, a world of all my relations, as Little Bear calls it. The relations with everything in creation. Knowledge is the relationship one has to all my relations. So these entanglements, even if they're very difficult, even if they're very problematic, that I've been trying to pull out in this talk, are exactly what we have to pay attention to if we're going to find other ways of doing and practicing AI. So Indigenous protocols are a very valuable and grossly underused tradition of knowledge that can offer different ways of thinking about the relationship between humans, nature, and technology. This quote from Jason Edward Lewis, I think, depicts precisely that. How do we as Indigenous people, he says, reconcile the fully embodied experience of being on the land with the generally disembodied experience of virtual spaces? How can Indigenous perspectives engender new ways of doing AI? This is the question I want to kind of leave us with. And one final thought about this before I wrap up is another concept that comes from this Indigenous Protocol position paper of Aina, the Hawaiian word for land. And the concept of AI as Aina is that we should treat these relations, exactly these that I've been talking about, between land, people, resources, technology, culture. We should treat them as we would all that nourishes and supports us. So rather than thinking about what we can extract, what we can gain, what we can use, the power we can exert, the service we can make to perpetuate these long overdue, these long standing logics, these power relations, rather than thinking about AI in that way, how can we maybe instead think about AI as a way to nourish and support relationships, to nourish and support relations between human societies and cultures, natural worlds, and ways of knowing and ways of being? So I'll leave it there and just say again, thank you so much for including me in this program. I hope this talk was useful or at least mildly interesting to you, and I really look forward to talking to you and hearing your questions afterwards. Thanks so much.